I left the United States House of Representatives. I threw out everything that I had that related to politics. I literally ordered a dumpster to my house and filled the dumpster and threw it away because I never thought anyone could possibly convince me that I should run for office again after the interesting experience that we had in the United States House of Representatives. But that was 10 years ago, and when I look at what's happened in our economy, in particular in the last few years, and where we stand as a state, it caused us to make the decision, and when I say us, my wife is usually here with me, but it caused us to make the decision to try and do something about it. When I think about where we're at as a state and where we're at as a country, it's not me anymore. I mean, we're really through our working years. We could retire. I'm not that far away from retirement. I'm not as old as George over there, but
careful.
The point is, you guys, I start thinking about Wisconsin. I think about our job loss, and I think about what's happening here in the state. And to me, it comes down to two of my three grandkids. We've just had a third one, and I start thinking about where are they going to work, where are they going to have an opportunity to raise their family when they get to be of that particular age, and what kind of opportunities are they going to have to live here in this great state? You know, Wisconsin is a very, very special place. We have natural resources here. We have a wonderful work ethic here. We have so many great things here in the state. But if we don't have jobs for our kids when the time comes, what exactly do we have and how are we going to keep them here? Our last grandchild, I shouldn't digress to this, but our last grandchild was born with some problems. We took him from one hospital to a second hospital, and I was sitting there when they wheeled that little child in, just completely filled with tubes and intensive care. And I have to ask myself, if a generation from now, these kids have their jobs in India or China or Mexico, where the health facilities and the care is not what it is today, that child would not be with us today. So when I start looking at this future, it's not just about whether I have to get on a plane to go visit the next generation. It's about what kind of a future do these kids really have in the lifestyle that we've had the wonderful privilege of living here in Wisconsin. Now, there's a lot of folks in the room that don't know my background. I mentioned before I was in Congress about 14 years ago. I'm from Wisconsin. We've got 3 adult kids, 3 grandkids, as I mentioned. Went to East Troy High School, went to UW Whitewater College, master's degree out of UW River Falls, and then did some graduate work after that back here at UW-Madison until business really took me away from that to a point where we didn't have time to pursue the final degree. I've got teaching experience in the public schools. I've taught in the university system. And I'm happy to say we have started 4 private schools over the last 7 years. So I bring from the education field kind of a wide variety of background and experience, everything from public school teaching to the private schools in Milwaukee. I'll talk a little bit more about later. We started our first business in 1980, which my wife likes to remind me is 3 decades ago. It was 1980 in the real estate business. I know there's some bankers in the room that remember that particular time. It was an interesting time to start a real estate business. We made it. We struggled, we figured out how to do it, we figured out how to make it. That's what America's all about. When times get tough, you've got to figure out how to make it work. That's what we're in again today. I served in Congress from 1995 to 1999, and since Congress I've been back in the private sector. We currently have 6 businesses. They're all related to the real estate industry, and it's been a great time for my son to learn the business, to be in a position to basically take them over. It's been about as tough as I've seen it in the home building business since I started in 1980 in the last 3 or 4 years. But again, we're making it. I start with this, and it's kind of good news. I mean, I look at our economy today, I look at the attitude of the people today, and what I'm seeing around me is very much what I saw 14 years ago when I went to the United States House of Representatives. I'm going to test your memory. Everybody remember Ross Perot? Ross Perot. You remember those eerie ads that he ran with those numbers coming across the screen telling us how much trouble we were in as a country? We were, by the way. He was right. We were in trouble. That's when I went to Congress. And we went to Congress with the idea that if we could balance the budget by controlling the growth rate of spending, controlling the growth rate of spending would put us in a position where we could cut taxes, and if we cut taxes, there would be more jobs created because people would have more of their own money to spend in the economy. Interesting thing. It worked. It took us 4 years to go from that eerie, scary Ross Perot kind of numbers floating across the screen to a point where the budget was balanced. When I left Washington 14 years ago, think about this, we were actually paying off debt. So budget was balanced, we were paying off debt. We passed the biggest tax cut in American history, and when you turned on the business shows in the morning, it wasn't bragging about the fact that we only lost 270,000 jobs last month instead of the 350,000 we lost the month before. Instead, the business shows were talking about the tens of thousands of jobs that have been created. Guys, we know what to do to fix the economy. You've got to control the growth rate of spending in government. You've got to cut the taxes, let people keep more of their own money. When they keep more of their own money, they'll spend it and jobs will be created. We know what to do. I was there when we did it the last time, and it worked. That was 10 years ago when I left Congress. it's almost scary, and Jason mentioned some of these numbers, by the way. I appreciate everything Jason's saying. I think he's absolutely the right thing for the state in that position. He mentioned this before as far as where we are in the debt right now today. When I left Congress 10 years ago, the debt was $5.6 trillion, or put into numbers that we can understand, it was about $77,000 for every family of four or group of four in the United States of America. Today, that debt is $11 trillion. It's staggering, folks. If every family were to pay off just their share of the debt, or every group of four people, we've got four sitting over here. So what I'd like you guys to do is cough up $150,000 and just pay your share of the debt here this morning. But that kind of puts it into perspective as to exactly where we are. The really scary thing to me, it's not just $150,000 of debt. This is real. This debt, it's absolutely real money that we're talking about that they've borrowed. And they are paying interest on it. I won't digress because I could stay on it all day. The question becomes, who's going to continue lending them this money? And it becomes more and more China and Japan, and pretty soon the ownership of America has been other countries, but that's another topic. This is the scariest thing right here. When I left Congress, we were not only not in deficit spending, we were in surplus paying down the federal debt. That was 10 years ago. The deficit today, that's just this year alone, the United States government is going to spend $1.8 trillion more money than what they collect in taxes, and I'll pick on the group back here. So what I'd like you guys to do is just help us balance the federal checkbook just this year. We're not going to pay off any debt now, just this year alone. Put your $24,000 on the table, because that's how much more they need to collect from you guys in taxes this year alone to balance the federal budget. It does not work. As Jason said, it's not sustainable. Can you do it for a short period of time? Maybe. That remains to be seen. At this point, we do not know when they actually spend this $1.8 trillion if somebody's actually going to sign up to buy the bonds. And you hear these bond auctions, they're starting, listen to the news. The coverage of the news is very different. There's bankers in this room. I'm sure you guys follow this closer than I do. The coverage of the bond auctions is very different than it used to be. When I left Congress, they were canceling the bond auctions because we were paying off so much debt that they didn't need to borrow the money. It went from there to just selling the bonds, and you'd hear about the bond auction, whatever the number was. Today, they're talking about the cover rate at the bond auctions. That wasn't going on. I can't ever remember hearing that 5 or 10 years ago. The cover rate means how many people showed up to buy the bonds versus the number that are actually sold. It's staggering when you really think about it, because what they're worried about is that they're not going to show up to buy the bonds. That is China, Japan, or other people from America. When that happens, that's when you're going to see, you've talked about the proverbial second dip, or the W part of this recession. Mark my words, the day and the week that they don't show up to buy our bonds is the week we go back into the second dip of this recession. So mark my words, that's coming. And when that happens, you're going to see it, and it's going to happen fast. That's dumb old Mark's opinion. What leads me to that is an understanding of history. This is a chart that relates the national debt to our GDP. Does that make sense? The amount of money our government has borrowed as it relates to our GDP. In World War II, we had a catastrophic happening going on around us, and we reached 100% where the debt actually equaled our GDP, and that was a catastrophic happening. It was World War II. When we got out of the war, the debt started dropping as it related to GDP, and our country was going pretty good. It started climbing to here. This is about a 70% range, debt to GDP. That's when Ross Perot started running those numbers across the screen. Now, we got the budget balance, as I was showing you before, and that debt to GDP actually started dropping because the economy was growing at the same time we were paying down debt. Worked pretty good. What's happened in the last year and a half or 2 years, we're going to cross the 100% mark probably this year, if not this year, for sure early next year, depending on how fast our economy recovers or doesn't recover. If you study history, every time the national debt has gotten to equal the GDP, there's been some sort of a catastrophic happening. Now, I don't mean catastrophic in terms of a violent takeover or anything like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean catastrophic in terms of a monumental downturn in our economy. We might be experiencing the first part of that right now today, and I would suggest to you that if this is not turned around, it's probably going to get worse, not better. So I'm very optimistic long term because I believe in America. I believe in the people sitting here in this room, and I think if you can figure out how to live through the housing crisis that we're living through today, and the banking crisis, some of these other things, I have a lot of faith in the American people. We will figure out how to get through it, but I think we have some pretty tough times ahead. Wisconsin as a whole is actually worse off than the nation as a whole. Our unemployment rate in 2003 was 5.6%. Today that number hovers around the 9% range. We've lost 128,000 jobs in the last year. And, you hear politicians talk about this stuff. Put this into perspective. When there's 128,000 less people working in the state of Wisconsin, what does that mean in terms of bank deposits? What does that mean in terms of people buying houses? It's real, folks. I've seen it firsthand in the home building business. It's just staggering when you think about the impact of this loss of jobs. And again, I can tell a lot of stories about it. The bottom part here is something that you don't hear a lot about. You hear a lot about the budget shortfall. What they forget to tell you about in our state budget is when they talk about the budget shortfall, what they actually mean is they don't have enough money to cover the increased spending from the last biennium to this biennium. The last biennium we spent about $56 billion, and the Doyle proposal this year was $62 billion, or a $6 billion increase in spending. Now again, coming out of the building industry where I'm at, probably a lot of the banks, and probably a lot of the folks in this room, if somebody would have told me that I could just spend the same amount next year that I spent this year, I would have been thrilled to death. In our building companies, we've had to reduce our operations costs anywhere from 25 to 30% in order to stay in business, and we figured out how to do it. And we're still in business and doing fine. So I mean, the point is if the state government would have done anywhere close to what we did, or even didn't reduce spending, but just held their spending constant from one biennium to the next, you would not be hearing about a budget shortfall today. They would be in surplus and cutting taxes instead of raising taxes. All right, that's all been kind of the gloomy side of what's going on around us. I want to turn now to what we should be doing about it. Because again, in politics, it's easy to just go, those guys got it all messed up and it's a big mess, and keep talking about the mess. I want to talk about the positive and what we ought to be doing about it. To me, that is far more important. I was asked the question today already in this room, Mark, what about running back for the United States Senate? You know, your career, if your time in Congress was good and successful, why don't you run for the United States Senate? Let me answer that question. The situation that we are in our federal government today is such that I don't have a plan that can fix it. When I went to Washington 14 years ago, George can attest to this, when you listen to our presentations, here's how we're going to fix the federal budget, here's what we need to do to balance it. We went there, a bunch of us got together, and it got done. I can't lay that plan on the table today. The numbers are so far lopsided that they're too messed up to fix, in my opinion, and I've studied these things pretty carefully. So what is the hope for the future of America? The hope for the future of this great nation that we live in is that somewhere, somebody figures out how to build a model that gets us globally competitive in this world that we're living in today. It's different than it was 10 years or 15 years ago. We are now in a global economy, and if we want jobs in Wisconsin, we need to learn how to compete globally. So where and how do you build that model? You can't do that from the federal level. That model needs to be built out here at the state. And whether it's Wisconsin that does it, or Indiana that does it, or Minnesota that does it, somebody's going to get it right. And when they get it right, all the other states are going to try and copy it. So let me talk about building a model, because I honestly believe we can do it right here in Wisconsin. We talk about what we need to do. First thing we need to do, it's why I'm here with Jason today. It's why I believe in what he's doing. America was made great by people coming out of the private sector with private sector experience and background, serving in government for a period of time, and then going back into the private sector to live under the laws that they passed. That's what made America great in the first place. It's not how we operate in America today. In America today, we have people that start at one level in politics, then they move up the ladder, and their version of a promotion is getting elected to the next highest office. And what happens is they bring with them a frame of reference that says that in order to get promoted, I've got to satisfy these constituencies, and how am I going to get votes? So rather than base government decisions on what's best for the state and the country and fiscally sound, their decision-making process rather becomes their career pattern. How do I promote my career, and how do I stay in this business that I'm in, just like you and I do. I mean, it's no different than you or me. When we're in business, we go, what do I have to do to adapt and change in the home building business so I can stay in business? And I adapt and change. Politicians do the same thing. They see their career path, and they do what they need to do, and that's what's led us to the mess. So the first thing we need to do, in my opinion, is we need to get private sector people back involved in government. Jason, that's why I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. Let me talk about the model now. Let's talk specifically about that model we're going to build here in the state of Wisconsin. The intent, the goal. You've got to have a vision where you're going to. We're going to globally competitiveness from our businesses that are here to stay. We want the businesses that are here to grow and expand here. And I don't want to have any more conversations like I've been having all over the state, where when I walk into a company and they've got 7 businesses spread out around the world, around the country, and I ask them about what I can get them to do to bring all 7 businesses here to Wisconsin, and they look at me and laugh at me. It's a true story. Guy had 700 jobs, he's down to 400 today. He's got 7 businesses spread out around the country and around the world. I said, okay, so what do I got to do, Bill? I want all those businesses here in Wisconsin. What do we need to do? He looked at me and laughed. He said, Mark, you got to be kidding me. Not only am I not bringing any of those businesses to Wisconsin, I'm trying to figure out how to move the rest of this business somewhere else. You guys, I don't want any more of that stuff. We need to get to a point where we're globally competitive in the marketplace, where the business story is the opposite of what I just said. Yeah, Mark, I'm looking to figure out how we can bring those other 7 businesses here to this location because it's the best spot in the world to do business. Let's talk specifics. Step 1, we have to stabilize our budget process in Madison. Today what's going on, and Jason referred to this, so I won't go through all of it, but the bottom line is you can't use accounting gimmickry, and you can't use bailouts from the federal government, and you can't steal from one fund to spend somewhere else and borrow from the fund that you did. It just doesn't work. So you got to straighten out the budgeting process. Jason's going to do that for us. I'm happy to say. More specifics, and by the way, I have political people on all sides of me advising me not to tell you what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to be very specific, and if we get there, this is what we're going to do. And I know the political people don't want me saying anything specific, because what if you get there and you can't do it? Well, I'll tell you this, if we're in the middle of a recession, things get worse, all bets are off, we're going to survive. And we're going to figure out how to supply the necessary services to the people of the state of Wisconsin at a much lower cost, just like we had to do in the home building industry. But if we come out of this recession, and eventually we will, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to do it one way or another in spite of what everybody around me tells me we can't do. We're going to first off cap the growth rate of spending at about 1% under the rate of inflation. Government's been growing faster than inflation for over a generation now. It's why it's so bloated. What we're simply going to do is systematically, incrementally bring government spending back into line by allowing an increase of not more than 1% less than the rate of inflation. For an example here, I'm going to assume that inflation is 3%, so that our spending increases max would be 2%. By the way, the numbers I showed you before, that was about 5.7% per annum. Okay, so I'm talking now 2 versus the 5 that you just saw in the middle of the recession. Second, this is really important to understand, when you look at government revenues go up for 2 reasons. They go up because of inflation, and that's not hard to understand. If you get a pay raise, you pay more in taxes, inflation leads to higher revenues to the government. But they also go up because of real growth in the economy. When the economy gets bigger, when we attract those businesses back here and our economy grows, those new employees at the business are going to pay taxes. So when you think about this, you've got revenue growing because of real growth in the economy, and I'll use 2% for a conservative number once we're out of the recession, plus inflation, you've got revenues growing at 5%. If someone were to actually implement this, which we're going to, think about what that means. You've got spending going up at a 2% rate, and by the way, for the good math people, I know it's actually a curve, not a line, but it's a little bit easier to see this way. You've got spending going up at 2%. At the same time, you've got revenues going up by 5%. Over an 8-year period of time, we can systematically reduce the tax structure in the state of Wisconsin by 24%. And you guys, a lot of people say you can't really do this. This is a historical table from the Congressional Budget Office. And I put it up here because when I have doubters as to whether or not we can actually do this, it's kind of nice to go, wait a second, here's the years, here's the revenues to the federal government, here's the spending at the federal government, here are the deficits all the years till when I went to Congress once before, and we got the job done exactly the way we said we were going to do it, and we went into surplus for a period of time. You guys, it actually worked. It's now a historical fact that it did work. We got the budget balanced. You can see what happened. It stayed in balance for about 2 years, and then it started going down the other way. And you wonder why Republicans lost control? They lost control because we got to here, and they went back to here. And by the way, that 485 number, do you remember the 1800 or the $1.8 trillion? That would be the same as if I wrote minus 1800 down here to put that number into perspective. It's pretty staggering. Does that make sense? Remember the deficit for just this year alone number? That would go down here, and it's going to be 1800. So that's, I didn't want to go back to the negative. I want to stay on the positive here. You guys, this can be done. It has been done before. We did it in Washington, D.C., where it was 50 times harder than it will be to do it in the state of Wisconsin. We will get it done here. Let me ask you a question. Remember this global model, this thing, model, globally competitive in the world marketplace? Let me ask you a question. If your governor in the year 2011, 2012 was on this track, and this track is laid out that when I'm sitting across the table recruiting a business, I can show them the track we're on to bring our taxes down, and we've actually done it in the first 2 years. What are the chances of getting that business to come to Wisconsin versus the situation we're in today? Can you see how it's more likely they're going to say, yes, I'll come to Wisconsin, I can see you're on track to reduce your taxes significantly, versus what we're dealing with today where they're going, your taxes are through the roof, why should I stay there when I can go someplace else and pay a lot less taxes? You with me on this? This is step one. Bring down taxes dramatically and we will be in a better position globally to compete in the job market. It's not enough all by itself. We next talk about the second most important thing, and that's education. When I say second most important, it's only because when taxes are too high, they don't even give us a look. If we get the taxes under control, they'll give us a look. The next thing we need is the best educated kids in the entire world. You guys, we are not competing with Minnesota or Illinois or Michigan. We are competing in this global marketplace, and they can go anywhere they want with these businesses. Now, we've got a lot of things going for us here in Wisconsin, but what we need is to make sure that our kids become the best educated kids in the world, so we have the best educated workforce in the world. If we can get there, it will be an important second step. How do you do that? You start with public schools. We have some really great public schools here in the state of Wisconsin. There are some really great ones out there. Where we have great public schools, we need to do everything we can to promote them and make them better. We've got some great teachers in this state, we really do. We also have a lot of mediocre and poor public schools in the state of Wisconsin. Milwaukee would be the classic example where we have the worst. Where we have poor and mediocre schools, we need to encourage competition through choice and charter. Those kids deserve an education in the city of Milwaukee. You can't restore Wisconsin when as big a piece of pie is over there in Milwaukee with a failed school system. It just doesn't work. And it's too big a portion of our pie to ignore it completely. So what we need to do is we need to encourage the choice in the charter system to compete with the public schools that are poor and failing. I mentioned before, I bring a unique set of qualifications as it relates to education. I do expect to see our kids be the best educated kids in the world, and I expect to lay out a plan as to how we're going to measure as they move in that direction. I've got 4 years teaching in our public schools. I've got, I don't know how many years teaching in our university system, quite a few, as well as at a private college. And like I said, 7 years ago, we started our first choice school in the city of Milwaukee. We now have 3 of them, and we have a charter school in Arizona. There are technical differences. A charter school is a public school and has to adhere to all the public school regulations. A choice school allows for religious affiliation of some sort. We have about 750 kids in our school system, and I can talk about it for a long time if you want me to, but let me give you just 2 statistics. Does anybody know what Terra Nova testing is? If you're not in education, you probably don't. Terra Nova is a national test. We don't use the Wisconsin test because we don't care to test for mediocrity. We're looking to test for excellence in our kids. So we use the nationalized test. Kids in the inner city of Milwaukee, worst school system in the state, are growing at a 5% faster rate than their average student across America. Now think about this. Everybody's telling us education in Milwaukee doesn't work, you can't educate the kids, all this stuff. Hogwash. The bottom line is when we measure these kids and we measure their growth rate, they're growing 5% faster than an average child in the United States of America in our schools. The second statistic, and I challenge anybody to match this statistic, 2 of our 3 schools in Milwaukee, every single parent showed up to parent-teacher conferences. If you're going to have a kid in our school, you're going to be involved in that child's education. Every single parent showed up for parent-teacher conferences at 2 of the 3 schools. You guys, schools are working. The system we have in place works. The amazing thing, the cost is about $6,500 per student to the taxpayer in the city of Milwaukee. The cost of a comparable public school is actually over $13,000 for the same education. So think about this for a minute. The cost is 50% of what the public schools are costing. The success is there in the program. Parents are deciding to bring their kids to our school, and think what the implications are to the taxpayer if we were to implement this sort of system, this sort of competition. It's phenomenal. And like I said, I can go on about our schools, but I spend the rest of the time on it. I want to jump to the third leg. Stay with me. Reduce taxes, best educated workforce in the world. We're building this big model as to how to make Wisconsin globally competitive again, to show how to bring our jobs back into the state. The third leg. We are currently passing all sorts of environmental rules and regulations that are destroying our opportunities for business. And what we've done in America is we've set up this fight where the Democrats are over here fighting. We've got to improve the environment, and the way you do that is through reduction of carbon emissions. And you'll hear global warming, all these other terms. I'm not even smart enough to debate those things. But I know I hear they're reduce carbon emissions because that's going to improve our environment. I don't care about the rest. We've got to improve our environment or we don't have a future. And you got the Republicans over here going, we're not doing that, because if you put those rules and regulations in, you're driving our businesses right out of here. And if you're half smart, you figure out those businesses are going to Mexico and to China and to India, and they're not participating in any of these environmental controls anyhow, so you get the pollution anyhow, but you lose your jobs. So we've set up this fight, Democrat, Republicans, and the Republicans look like they're anti-environmentalists, and the Democrats look like they're anti-business. I want to suggest to you an entirely new way to look at environment in terms of relating back to jobs. I would like to suggest to you that we consider reducing our carbon emissions in a way that creates jobs here in the state of Wisconsin. And let me suggest what I'm talking about. Instead of the Democrat cap and trade idea, which is a horrible idea and is going to drive jobs out of the state of Wisconsin and out of America, instead of that, we achieve those goals of reduction of carbon emissions, but we do it in a way that creates jobs here. And let me show you a specific example. The last thing I did before we left our business, or before I left most of my business to my son, is we designed and developed a house that literally produces more energy than it uses. This is significant because of two things. One, we don't have any gas or electric needed in the house, so we have reduced our dependence on foreign oil. And the second is 47% of all carbon emissions come from buildings, and this building is virtually carbon emission free. Okay, so on both fronts. What we did is we used geothermal, and we used solar panels, and we're literally producing all the energy we need to heat and cool the house, everything we need to run all the appliances, the stove, the refrigerator, your computers, everything you can think of, and enough extra electricity to run an electric car back and forth to work if America ever figures out how to build a good electric car. So just think about what we've done in this technology. And the key to it, it's cheaper to live in this home today than if I build the exact same home next door. If you look at your cost of gas and electric, your mortgage payment, and you look at the two houses sitting side by side, it's cheaper to live in the energy-producing home than it is a home that we're currently building. Now, this is not all the answer, and we have no secret technology here. All we did was put together a whole bunch of things that are already out there. But I want you to think about what's actually happened here. We've actually reduced our carbon emissions, desirable for the environment from the left's perspective. At the same time, we've built jobs, desirable from the right's perspective in terms of creating jobs and promoting businesses. We put these two ideas together. My son coined a new word, and I think it's really going to become part of our society as we move forward. He coined the word eco-capitalism. And what he's done is he's taken the idea that if we turn capitalism loose on solving the environmental problems, we'll probably solve the environmental problems and create a lot of jobs and businesses here in Wisconsin and in America. He's right. That's what we should be doing as it relates to the environment. Let me paint a picture for you. A generation from today. I want some big ideas, folks. I want us to think positive about the future again. Generation from today, I would like Wisconsin to be 100% energy independent with clean, renewable energy sources. And I want us to think about a generation ago and how far we've come. Some of you in this room are old enough to remember when we first learned about computers. Remember the computer cards? They were stacked about this thick. I'm looking around the room because if you're in a certain age group, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, you have no clue what I'm talking about. When I was in college, we had a stack of computer cards this thick. If I wanted to do a computer program, I waited in line, and there'd be a computer mainframe that would fill that room behind you there, that huge monster computer. They'd feed my cards through the computer, and then they'd bring my cards back, and if I'd followed up my program, I had to go redo the cards and take them back and do it all over again. Today, I have way more power in the palm of my hand than that mainframe computer that filled the entire room over there a generation ago. Folks, we've got to get out of this. Here's where we are today, and I'm pouting because it's not good enough. And we've got to start looking at where we've been, how far we've come, and then thinking about where we're going to. If you want to solve the problems in America today, you've got to start thinking ahead to the next generation. And I want to suggest to you that green energy and green technology, these renewable energy sources, that is the computer of our generation right now today. A generation ago, those computer cards to here, today, from this green technology that we're starting, leading the way here with our company, forward on into the future, because the job market that's there in this technology, in the research, in the installing the solar panels, in the production of the solar panels, and the geothermal, the job opportunities that are in these green areas, they're so immense right now today that we should be pursuing them at every turn of the corner, and we're not today. If you want to think then about this big model of where we're going to, think about this model of reduced taxes, top quality education, and solving our environmental problems in a way that creates jobs instead of destroys businesses. Guys, if we can put that model together here in the state of Wisconsin, we can lead the way into the future. And that's really what's brought me back out of the private sector, because when you really think about this, we are Americans. We can do a lot better than we're currently doing. And where we really go to is it's our responsibility to the next generation. You know, when my little Charlie looks up at me, that's this guy. When he looks up at me, and I'm coming to an event like this, instead of staying there with him to watch him swim or whatever, and he does, he waves, "Bye-bye, Grandpa." He has absolute 100% confidence that I'm going to do the right thing for him in his future. He has no clue what the problems are. He's a year and a half old. He doesn't get any of this stuff. But he has 100% confidence that we in our generation are going to do the right thing for the future of this country. How can we do less than to step forward and change what's going on around us to restore our state and our country? That's what's got me back into the political world. That's why I'm running.